Good evening. I'm J.D. Long-Garcia, Senior Editor at America Media. Thank you very much for joining us through live stream. We want you to be a part of the conversation, so please offer your comments to us and your questions via the social media, either through Twitter or through Facebook. And we'll have a chance at the end for the panelists to address your questions. So please don't hesitate to do that, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started with our panel, I would like to invite Sir Mario Paredes, CEO of Somos Community Care and a member of the Board of Directors of America Media, to give us some welcoming to tonight's evening. Mario?
Good evening. Good evening. As a board member of America Media, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to this conversation on immigration, education, and incarceration. A panel discussion that will demonstrate the rich tradition of Catholic social teaching as it's engaged with some of the burning issues of the day, particularly as they have an impact on Latino Catholics in this country. That engagement of the broader culture, that unfailing focus on the intersection of faith and culture in all its forms, politics and social issues in particular, but the realm of the art as well, is the hallmark of America Media, the host of tonight's proceedings. That is precisely its mission, to bring a decisively non-ideological Catholic perspective into the public square in order to promote genuine, open dialogue, even and especially with those with whom Catholics might disagree on certain fundamental issues. It is a mission committed to finding common ground with dialogue partners of all backgrounds in order to serve the common good, in particularly the interests of the most vulnerable members of society. This approach is proven to be a most effective way for the Catholic perspective to be heard on all of the most important issues of the day. America Media does its work on a variety of fronts. First and foremost, there is America Magazine, in print and online, a regular review of the Church in contemporary society with its sophisticated coverage of issues both domestic and international. In addition to their print media, America utilized several digital platforms, including social media, reaching hundreds of thousands each day. America Films, which produces top-notch interviews with newsmakers in a variety of fields, and with a complete audio platform in the form of podcasts, and America this week on Sirius XM Radio. America also organized public events like the one this evening, bringing live, vital discussion directly to audiences. In addition, it also offered unique retreat-like pilgrimage to holy destinations in various places around the world. Then there is the Catholic Book Club, which facilitates small group discussions of great contemporary and classic literature. American Media is truly a leader in the U.S. Catholic Church of putting an unblinking spotlight on faith encountering culture. As such, it is always proposing and never imposing a Catholic perspective on the most important issues that affect all Americans, regardless of faith or creed. Dear friend, enjoy the conversation tonight.
Good evening. I'm Father Matt Malone. I'm the President and Editor-in-Chief of American Media, and you are most welcome here this evening. This is an event that complements the special issue of America that you have here, a complimentary copy on your seats, and those of you who are watching on one of your digital devices, you can access all of this content at americamagazine.org. This is part of an initiative to examine the future of the Church in the United States with a particular eye to how to more fully integrate Hispanic Catholics into the life of the American Church. And we are delighted to launch this initiative. It is part of a long history of America's coverage of these issues for more than 108 years. I like to point out that when the editors first launched this review in 1909, they were very careful to say in the editorial announcement that the name America was not synonymous with the United States, but encompassed the entire Western Hemisphere. And I think you will agree with me that a recovery of that hemispheric imagination among the people of the United States is especially important given the temper of the times. So it is my great joy to welcome you here this evening and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Sir Mario. Thank you, Father Malone. I'd like to now introduce our distinguished panel. First, I'd like to introduce Zachariah Presutti, SJ, a Jesuit scholar. He's an Assistant Executive Director of Centro Altagracia de Fe y Justicia in Washington Heights, and Executive Director of Thrive for Life Prison Project. Zach earned a master's degree in social work with a focus on individuals in the criminal justice system, and is also a psychotherapist for formerly incarcerated individuals. Thrive for Life Prison Project bridges trust, healing, and reconciliation between incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals and the community through education and Ignatian spirituality. So we're looking forward to hearing more about that during the panel discussion. We also have Jill Kafka, Executive Director of Partnership Schools, a trailblazing nonprofit that runs a network of 6 high-performing, faith-filled urban Catholic schools in Harlem and the South Bronx. They serve over 2,000 students from 2 of the poorest congressional districts in the country. Prior to partnership, Jill was a partner and senior vice president of sales at Harbor Financial Corporation and specialized in mortgage-backed securities, a vice president of sales at Goldman Sachs, and a mortgage-backed securities trader at Drexel Burham Lambert. Thank you guys for being here. Laura Garcia is also on our panel, and she's the Racial Justice Manager for YWCA in Orange County, New York. In that role, she oversees a portfolio of programs addressing teaching tough topics, the Mexican Initiative for Deferred Action, Immigrants Vote Campaign, and others. She is the founder of Dreamers with No Borders, a group of young adults whose mission is to educate and empower the Latino, undocumented, and migrant community in the Hudson Valley through the attainment of higher education and civic engagement. Laura also coordinates Mujeres Latinas of Hudson Valley, a group of undocumented migrant women from Middletown and Newburgh, from the Middletown-Newburgh area. Thank you for being here, Laura. Kevin Appleby is Senior Director of International Migration Policy for the Center of Migration Studies and the Scalabrini Migration Network. Before his current roles, Kevin served as Director of Migration Policy and Public Affairs for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. He did that for more than 16 years. He also worked as deputy director of the Maryland Catholic Conference in Annapolis, and he has testified before Congress on immigration issues and has represented the U.S. Catholic bishops on these issues at public events and with the media. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. I didn't commit all of that to memory before we got started, so I was relying heavily on this. So one of the issues that's been dominating the news cycle for over a year now is with Dreamers, and those undocumented immigrants who came to this country with their parents. In September, the Trump administration ended the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a program that was put into place by the Obama administration. Now, since that time, the courts have put a stop to or canceled the cancellation, so to speak. But nonetheless, Dreamers in our country that number more than 2.2 million are living in a state of uncertainty as to what their futures will be like. Laura, you worked with this population very much, and I'd like to ask you, how have the last 6 months been for you? What can you tell us about that?
October 5th is a very important date, a very sad date for us. That was the beginning of the end of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And when we found out that the date was the last opportunity for a certain group to renew their DACA, we got in working mode. As a nonprofit organization, we've helped individuals in the past to apply for the program, and so now we had to find money for them so they could afford to pay the renewal fee, which was close to $500. So we set up a scholarship. We were very grateful that we were able to help a lot of people to renew with the assistance of the local ONA office in our area. We have very limited resources in upstate New York, and so it becomes very tough for people to even afford to see an attorney. So we were able to do that. But the last 6 months, beginning October 5th, also became a bit of a realization for me. I'm also a DACA recipient, so when I found out that the program was ending, I immediately thought about my family. I have a brother who's battling who has ALS, and my father was deported in 2008. So for the past 3 years, I've been able to obtain advanced parole to see them. And when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to see them this holiday season, it really hit me hard. But there was no time to kind of process that. We had to keep pushing forward for the rest of the people who were depending on us. So come December, we organized a couple of buses to go down to Washington, D.C. with a lot of other organizations to push and try to ask Congress to pass a Clean Dream Act. We did the same thing in January, and we continue to organize, and it's been a really difficult time, but these past 6 months, it hasn't been the same. You can't even write something on Facebook without being pointed out. You can't walk and speak in a rally as you would as a DACA recipient because you're no longer, in a sense, protected. We're being targeted. I've been retweeted to ICE a few times. But one of the things that I've learned about our movement is that we had setbacks and we won a couple of things, but we just never give up. And I think that that's been really important. So these 6 months have been very tough on us, but it's something that has allowed us to push forward no matter what.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That we, when we write about it here at American Media, online and in print, and even our videos, we get mixed feedback. You know, there's a lot of people who I've interviewed who've told me that the church isn't saying enough about this, that the church needs to say more. There are other people that just want the church to be quiet about this. But what about you? What's your perception of how the church has been involved in this issue?
The church is definitely very important for our community. That's where we do most of our Know Your Rights workshops for our undocumented community. It's what gathers the community to feel safe, in a sense. And when you are looking towards leadership, it's really important to have the church to be one of those leaders. And so to me, it's been really important to coordinate and work with our local church. But what I've noticed is, in a way, that the message is a little bit different depending what community you're from. So obviously, in a Catholic Hispanic community, the priest is gonna give a sermon of a little bit different than an English American community. And I understand the differences, right? I mean, you have a community that you need to speak to in order for them to feel safe. But it's important for us to hear not only that our allies are with us and who may not be going through the same thing, but that they understand, because at the end of the day, we're a whole community of Catholics. So it doesn't matter that we speak Spanish or English, we read from the same Bible. And so I think it's extremely important that we both come into a conclusion that this is important to all of us and that we have to speak out in order for everyone to understand that message.
Great, thank you very much. Kevin, before at your role at the Center for Migration Studies with the Scalabrini Network, but then also before with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, you had to articulate what the church position is on immigration often. And it may be a simple thing to talk about, but I think it's important to go back and sort of look at what does the church actually teach about immigration?
Well, for the church, immigration is about the human being and the human rights and human dignity of the human being and the person, regardless of migration status. And that's where the basic principle that the church follows in advocating on behalf of immigrants in the public square. I'll say up front, though, it's certainly a justice issue based on our history, the Gospels, Jesus' call to welcome the stranger, papal teaching over the decades. But I'll say up front, I always do in a debate, I always say this is an institutional issue as well. To borrow a phrase from a defunct toy store, immigrants are us. I mean, we were less than 1% of the population in the original 13 colonies, and now we're 20 to 22% of the population. It's not just because we're fertile. It's because immigration has really defined the church over the last 200 years, sort of parallel to how the nation has grown. And immigrants are in our charities, they're in our hospitals, they're in our schools, and of course they're in our parishes. So it'd be derelict of the bishops and the Catholic community not to advocate for their best interests. It's something that you would do as a pastor and as a neighbor. So the bishops, I think, and other dioceses and Catholics across the country have been involved in this issue over the past, several decades in an attempt to bring some justice to our system, which is really broken. And the bishops have come out for comprehensive immigration reform, of course. They've advocated on behalf of the Dreamers, and they're in the middle of this current debate, certainly with the Trump administration on their enforcement focus. So, and they'll continue to be until we can get to a place where we have a system that's more just, I think.
That's great. I want to, if I can ask a follow-up question about that, related to what Laura was relating to us about family separation. Oftentimes because of our broken immigration system, families are divided. And then also, we recently there's been I would say almost a rebranding of family-based migration, and now it's being referred to as chain migration. Can you talk about the difference between that and what that means?
Right. So in the recent debate over DACA and the Dreamers, the president came out and said in exchange for giving them a permanent residency, he wanted to eliminate the family-based immigration system, which has really been the cornerstone of our system since 1965. And they brought back a phrase called chain migration, which is a divisive phrase, which suggests that in the family-based system that you can petition for every relative that you've ever known over a short amount of time to come to the United States. So it really enlarges the number of people coming. And the argument is that if you give the Dreamers a path to citizenship, then they can bring all their cousins and everyone else in, which is simply not the case. The system is basically categories of family members that are not extended family. They're spouses, children, adult married children, and brothers and sisters. I wouldn't consider that extended family. And there's also limits on each category each year. And there's backlogs in those categories. It takes up to 20, 25 years for a brother or sister to get in legally through the family-based immigration system. The bishops have argued in comprehensive immigration reform debates that the system shouldn't be dismantled, it should be reformed so that people can reunite more easily. Because what that does is it takes away an incentive in a humane way of people who come to join their families, and that happens all the time. It's for jobs, certainly people come, and certainly people come because they're persecuted, but they also come to join family. If you have a robust family immigration system, then they're able to do that legally. And I would also say that family-based immigration has been beneficial to our country on several levels. Families are economic actors. That we've done a study that shows that family-based visas and workers who come from those family-based visas are more upwardly mobile because they have support from their families. Families keep them off of government assistance, for example. And it also is a social glue for a lot of immigrant communities around the country. So to abandon the family-based immigration system and really cut the legal immigration system in half to really 500,000, as opposed to where it is now, close to 1 million every year, would really undercut not only our economy, but our social fabric. And we've made that argument in this debate, and so have the bishops, and we'll see where it goes.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. We're talking a lot about immigration so far this evening, but 2/3 of, as Antonio mentioned in the special issue that we have there, 2/3 of Latinos or Hispanics that were born in the United States. And the other thing to keep in mind is that even the terms Latino or Hispanic are very general and almost oversimplify. Most Latinos, I was born in the Dominican Republic, so I identify as Dominican. There's Latinos that are Mexicans, Chilenos, Guatemaltecos, we're from all over the place. And so even the term Latino itself is kind of an oversimplification. And I think it's also, when we talk about this issue, if we only talked about immigration, we would be missing out on a really large part of it. Thankfully, we have Jill Kafka here to talk about Catholic education, which is another very, very important issue. Now, we see right now, Catholics that are under 18 years old, 55% of them are Latino. And yet, in Catholic schools, there are only 17% of students that are Latino. So there's a great disparity there. However, Jill, in the partnership program, that's not happening. That's not the case at all. You actually have a majority of Latino students. Could you tell us more about that?
Sure. So yeah, we have 68% of our students at our 6 schools are Latino. And that really does reflect the communities that we are serving. Our Bronx schools alone, and I have 2 of our principals from the Bronx are here, so there's 75% Latino enrollment in the Bronx schools. And that being said, the vast majority of Catholic schools, though, that have closed have been in neighborhoods that have served the disadvantaged. And so, I think that it makes sense that the number of Latinos in these schools is low and could stay low if there isn't more of an effort to bring them in and to try to reverse the trend of Catholic schools closing. So we are working to reverse that trend, and obviously there's a lot more that Catholic schools can do to bring Latinos into their schools. We surveyed our parents. We found out that a lot of them really feel a connection to the school. They feel that, and we work on this intentionally, that their Latinidad is important and it's a benefit to the school. They have communications in English and in Spanish. The children pray in Spanish and English. They sing in English and Spanish. And so they really feel that the schools are listening to them and including them into the way the schools are operating. And also our churches and our schools were built for and by these communities. This is why they exist. And so I think there's that welcoming, and we've tried to amplify that in our schools. And lastly, Pope Francis visited one of our schools in East Harlem back in 2015. He spoke to our children in Spanish. I'll tell you what he said in English, though. He said one of the nice things about this school is that some of its students come from places even from other countries. And we make new friends. We meet people who open doors for us, who are kind to us. How nice it is to feel that school is a second home. School then ends up being one big family. So I think he nailed it. That's what I think. It was a great way of expressing what our schools do.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing that. When I think about kids going to Catholic school, I think that these are families that are affluent, and yet you're working in 2 of the poorest neighborhoods in the country. Can you tell us more about how you deal with the cost? How are the students able to afford that?
So, well, first of all, we do what we can to keep the cost as low as possible, obviously without sacrificing the quality. We work with each family individually. We provide, and Catholic schools historically have done that, and that's a promise that we intend to keep. We provide a lot of scholarship dollars. 84% of our kids are on some form of scholarship. The median income of those families is $24,000. A lot of them are on a scholarship that's between 50 and 75% of the tuition, and that median income is $15,000. So we have to do that. And we also provide a lot of emergency support, so then when someone has an issue, we can try to address it quickly, temporarily. We also, again, they rely, we know, on an informal family network. Some of them have grandparents and other relatives. They're sending money, and we know sometimes they can miss a payment, but then we're very flexible, and we keep in good communication with our parents so that we can make that up and help them out when they need to later. And we're also sort of generally trying to think more about sustainability of this and how do we keep this going? How do we either find other government sources that may be out there? How can we look towards maybe a very small percent of parents paying more than what our stated tuition is in order to help offset the numbers? But we just really continue to keep as many families as possible given the resources we have.
Great. If I just one more question. For years now, we've seen Catholic schools closing, throughout the country. We've had issues with Catholic schools closing, and the number of Catholics continues to grow, and that's certainly the case with Latino Catholics. Can you talk about that? How does that relate to a program like yours, where you're creating sustainability, where in other places we're seeing a lot of school closures?
Well, there is the school choice effort that is helping many states have more income because of public dollars that parents can then use to choose a Catholic education. And so that's a separate effort that I think and I hope is allowing for Catholic schools to reverse that trend, to stay healthy, to continue to serve their communities. What we hope is that we're sort of a proof point in what's possible, and the fact that all of these Catholic schools exist should not be closing. There is an answer and a way to make them better. We've turned around our schools from very underperforming to much better academically. We've tightened up their finances. We've been able to add a lot of resources, and I think as a model that can hopefully inform the rest of the country on what's possible, especially in the cases where there are dollars that can come to those schools.
Great. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. In terms of education, Zach, you utilize both education and Ignatian spirituality in your work, and that might not be the first thing that people think about when they're thinking about people who have been incarcerated or had formerly been incarcerated. So can you explain a little bit more about that? How does that come together in your outreach?
Sure. Yeah, so it comes out of this organization, this nonprofit organization that we have called Thrive for Life Prison Project, and we're very grateful. Our offices are located down at Xavier Parish, Xavier High School in Chelsea. And what we've been doing over these years, we got our start by going into the facilities to actually help to fill the gap in pastoral and spiritual care to this population, this mammoth population of people who are locked up on this island that many of you New Yorkers don't even know how to get there or where they are. So we responded to this need to offer spiritual and pastoral care, and now we're in 6 different correctional facilities throughout the metropolitan area doing that and utilizing Ignatius's spiritual exercises to help accompany people in a way that offers them an invitation to be in touch with that love that's been there for them from the very beginning, and an invitation to live out of that love. But over the last couple years of doing our spirituality, our spiritual exercises behind the walls, we've, as you can imagine, formed deep relationships with these many women and men who are locked up behind the walls. And we encountered through this relationship that people would be getting out, and they would be saying, can you help me find a job? Can you help me get a house? Can you help me find housing? Or can you help me get back in touch with my family? Whatever it might be. And so the evolution of the organization came out of these personal relationships that we've made with people out of the behind the walls. And so now we offer spirituality and educational resources for people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. So we're continue the spirituality of offering spiritual exercises, but now we're preparing to open a house of studies called Ignacio House. It'll be located near Fordham University in the Bronx. And this will be a place of hospitality and study for people who are re-entering the community after years of incarceration and can come to receive the supportive living services that are necessary for that re-entry process, scholarships to local universities so they can continue their education, and job workforce training with local employers. So if you're familiar with the Cristo Rey model, we're actually plagiarizing here. We're applying the Cristo Rey model to reentry and offering that supportive housing that's so necessary for sustainable and comprehensive reentry into the community.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I don't know if it's stealing if it's within the same family. That's probably okay. So thank you for sharing that. In terms of, it sounds to me like some of what's happening is through your encounters with people who have been incarcerated, things are transforming, and you're meeting the needs of those that you serve. That's something that our Holy Father talks about a lot, is this culture of encounter. Now, in terms of, in terms of the Latino community in particular, there's a disproportionate number of Latinos that are incarcerated. Have you found that presents particular challenges in terms of reintegration into society?
Sure, yes, and as you probably can imagine, that a lot of our population of people who might come to the different services we offer, especially with spirituality, are Latino. And one of the things is, I'm reminded of The Atlantic had an article about a year and a half ago about the Latino problem, they called it, with criminal justice. And basically what the author was sharing was there's two things that are very difficult about trying to understand the Latino population within the criminal justice system. One is that we've neglected the population. We've focused for the last 50 years on the white and black population within the criminal justice system, and there's just a lack of or laziness on research that's been done in this area. Now, it's picked up over the years, especially in Texas, at the University of Texas. And then the second is, as you hit on yourself, the complexity of the word Latino. What does Latino mean? What does it mean to be of Hispanic background, Cuban, Colombian, Puerto Rican? And we see that, and each of those different backgrounds comes with its own complexity, right? And I'm thinking, for instance, of a guy right now. I'm thinking of Javier. Okay, so Javier caught his charges here in this country when he traveled from Puerto Rico here to see a family member over 30 years ago. And while he was here, he couldn't find a job. He had hard time with housing, so he hit the streets and got involved in actually a lot of stuff, but ended up getting himself locked up for about 25 years with a life attached to it. And Javier has been a part of our spirituality programming up at the upstate prisons, and he, thanks be to God and to the New York State Parole Board, this year was granted parole. But Javier hit a real unique obstacle in the road, right? He didn't have anyone. He came here to see a family member who has since died, and everyone else is back in Puerto Rico. And he has no way of getting there. He has to re-enter to New York. Javier, he would tell you that. I speak perfect Spanglish, and Javier learned the English he knows while he was locked up. But after he was granted this parole, he came to us and said, first of all, can you pick me up when I'm getting out of prison? But second, can you help me? And this is the particularities of the population, right? It's really that Ignatian sense of cura personalis. We really have to see the person as created in the likeness and image of God, with their own particular, their own particular needs and desires. And with people who are Latino, we have to take their context into consideration as well. Do they have family here? Did they grow up here? Maybe they caught their charges in New York, but do they even know New York? How long were they in town for? Or how long were they around? So we seek to do that. We seek to apply this cura personalis and apply this continuity of care for people that we form and encounter behind the walls, and be able to accompany them on the outside as well. So we're very grateful. Actually, Javier is a very wonderful guy, and but we just were able to get him a permanent apartment here in the city due to a partnership we have with an organization that does affordable housing. So it's all possible. It takes a little time, but the accompaniment is really necessary.
That's wonderful, and I think it's so important to hear good news stories like that are so encouraging, that when we do make the effort, that good things can come despite an unjust system. So that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like it's also the charism that Pope Francis is imparting on the entire church, challenging us to see individuals. And Laura, I want to ask you, you had a very special encounter with Pope Francis, and I wanted to ask you about that, and how has that inspired your work?
Yeah, I was lucky to be at the Harlem School when he came to visit, and Catholic Charities had invited me to be there. There were close to 100 immigrant, refugee, individual people who were invited to attend, and I was sitting with the children who are in a soccer team with their refugees, and it was really cool to have them next to me because they had their jerseys, and I love soccer. That's one of my guilty pleasures that I have. I play it myself, and so it was really interesting to be there in community with all those people who work so hard to create a gift to give to the Pope. And I remember that we could hear him next door with the children. And I could just look around the room, and everybody was took a moment to just take it all in, and we just got excited as we could hear him, like, he's coming, and it was really, really an emotional moment. But you didn't know if you wanted to cry or if you wanted to scream, because to some of us young people, he's like an idol, right? He's like a very famous person, and so it was really interesting to go through those feelings. And one of the first things he said when he started speaking was, I, an immigrant, I am the face of an immigrant, and I come from immigrant parents. And that to me really touched me, because I think when you come to this country, you always battle with not knowing if you are from the country you're from or if you're from here, right? But I always say in Spanish, soy de aquí, soy de allá. I'm a mix of my country and I'm a mix of this country. And so that was really empowering. The Pope always tends to have amazing messages to my community. Most recently, he said something at his sermon for Palm Sunday, and he was directing his words to the children or the young people who walked out the day before for March of Our Lives. And he said, "Dear young people, it is in you to shout." And so I automatically just focused on the TV, and I said, did he really just say that? I mean, am I watching Cesar Chavez speaking on the TV? Because that was the kind of feeling that I got by hearing the Pope. And I just love the idea that we have such a leader who can really connect with everyone. And I'm sure when he said dear young people, he meant young people at heart as well, right? And I just find it amazing to be able to have been in his presence and to have been able to hear him speak and to connect with everyone that was there and to feel like I belong. And I think that that's the most important thing, that he makes everyone belong somewhere. And when you travel, when you go somewhere, there's no place like home. But what is home, right? It's that feeling of belonging, is being in church and feeling like you belong. And so that message to me really resonates every time I think about the Pope. And I saw that big poster you guys have in the back, and I said I was going to take another selfie, because the one I tried to take when he was here, you can only see my glasses, and I tried to take a picture from the back, so yeah.
Well, sure. Maybe not right now, but right after the panel would be great. So thank you very much for sharing that. I've had a chance to see Pope Francis in person as well, and likewise, it's very inspiring. I wonder, when we talk about immigration reform, it's something that the church has been talking about for a very long time. I myself have been reporting on it for 15 years, and we don't seem to be making any progress at all. So, Kevin, I'd like to ask you, in terms of Washington, now we hear about the culture of encounter with young people, the culture of encounter for the marginalized. What about Washington? What could a culture of encounter do there, and can we get comprehensive immigration reform done?
Well, I remember, excuse me, when the Pope spoke to Congress in 2015, it was such a moving moment, and he talked about the golden rule, and if we want security, give security, if we want opportunity, give opportunity, if we want life, give life. And I was hoping at that moment that would, automatically spread magical dust on all the representatives and senators, and they would all start working together. But it seems, unfortunately, that the partisan divide is even getting wider these days. And our representatives, as well as our wider society, is not talking to each other. We really need to put our cell phones down. The age of Twitter, people are talking at each other and even insulting each other, and that's not a way to get something done with one relationship as well as within Congress. And we're seeing that playing out now, where both sides are just sort of dug in, not only on immigration, but a wide variety of issues. And our political system is almost broken. The most that Congress does every year, in many cases, is pass the budget, and barely, after they extend it several times. And it's really getting to a crisis point. I don't know exactly what the answer is. I mean, the answer is from the grassroots up, certainly, that we need to get more involved in the public policy process and the political process. And on immigration, that's really the issue as to why we haven't gotten immigration reform. Because the polls show 50-60% of Americans, you know how polls are, they have different questions, but 50-60% consistently support immigration reform and a path to citizenship, once it's explained to them what immigrants have to go through. The problem is getting that 50 or 60% to pick up the phone or to write a letter or to go to a town hall and make a point. And immigration opponents are very good at organizing and doing that, whereas the pro-immigration side, including the Catholic Church, has to do a better job of mobilizing those toward immigration reform. And once that happens, hopefully, we'll eventually get immigration reform and a just immigration reform bill. One of the other reasons that immigration reform hasn't passed is this. If it's broke, don't fix it. What do I mean by that? Those who are most harmed by our current system have no voice. They're not constituents. They don't vote. The Dreamers have changed that a lot. The Dreamers have come along and they've said, we are going to advocate, and they've put a face on the issue, and they've come very close. But by and large, undocumented immigrants don't have that organizing power to organize to get something in their interest, and we haven't built up enough power on their behalf yet to get a bill through that is worth support. But it's something that we can continue to work on moving forward.
Great, thank you very much for that insight. In terms of reform, Zach, in our conversation before the panel, you mentioned that with criminal justice reform, there was somewhat of bipartisan support for that, unlike a lot of the other issues that Kevin was mentioning. What would criminal justice reform look like? What is it that we're striving for when we talk about reforming the criminal justice system?
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel very hopeful about reform. I mean, it was a bipartisan effort to get this mess that we're in right now. So it's, I think, going to be a very bipartisan effort to get us out of it. I really believe that. I think of things like, Governor Cuomo's initiative with the Excelsior program of education and offering these opportunities for education to people who are formerly incarcerated. And just this month, President Trump has declared the Second Chance Month, and asking for legislation to look at the federal system and look particularly for those who are caught up in nonviolent drug charges and seeing what can be done to reform it. For me, I think that at the heart of things is the services and programming that's offered while people are locked up. How are we going to have people, if they're there, how are we going to invite people to do their time, right? What's the kind of resources and services that we can offer? I mean, just sitting around, well, you can imagine what you can do, right? But what kinds of things can we put in place to offer people the services and resources they need? Because it behooves us, right? 99% of the people who are locked up behind the walls in this country are coming right back into our communities. They're coming right back. So it behooves us to do something to offer something while they're doing their time. And I think that's slowly but surely coming around. And there's some new things being introduced, creative things that are being introduced. But I think a lot of the conversations in our organization at Thrive for Life Prison Project is we're trying to say, okay, they're pushing for closing Rikers, okay, and they want to downsize the prison system upstate, and they want to downsize the prisons and the feds. That's all wonderful. That's great. We're all behind it. But what happens when the people get out? How can we help facilitate and be a part of offering that continuity of care for those who are coming back into our community? It's got to start while they're inside and be continued when they re-enter.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Jill, I wanted to ask you a question, and just keeping in mind that our audience is larger than the one here, that there's people that may be streaming this from different parts of the country. The model that you're talking about, certainly gives me a lot of hope as a Catholic, but there might be people out there that don't know how to do this. It seems like such a heavy lift that they might not be experiencing the level of Latino enrollment that you are. Can you give us some tips, or even like how other Catholic schools can do what you guys are doing?
Sure. So I think that first and foremost, our leaders and our teachers are community leaders. They're not just school leaders. And I think that's super important because they're part of the community, and they're really working together to address the common needs that are in that community and share the common heritage of that community. And so, one example is in the school actually that the Pope Francis went to, that principal started an adult ESL program really to address a need that had come up, and really because of that connection to knowing what was going on and what would help that community. We also, we celebrate days and people that are important to the Latino Catholics. So we have a celebration of Our Lady of Alta Gracia and Our Lady of Guadalupe, and we have day for Juan Diego, and there's celebrations. And that's important. We admit students in pre-K that don't speak English. And we also accept those who are undocumented. It doesn't matter. They don't need to be a citizen to come to our schools. And then we also just allow each of the schools to have their own sense of their community and their Latinidad, and the way they operate can be adjusted. And it's just an incredibly welcoming, nurturing environment. And talk about belonging. I mean, our schools are families. They are truly like families. And I think going out of your way to communicate well, to be flexible, to be in touch with those families and create that environment. Marianne Kraft, one of our principals here, every morning there is an assembly where the community prays together, they celebrate things together. Families are lined up in the back as they've dropped off their child. They're part of that every single day, and many of our schools have that kind of a gathering, and it's really, it's powerful. And so when we invite more of community members to be part of that and to celebrate with us, I think there's a lot more we all can do.
Thank you. I think that this conversation could go on for a long time, but and I'm so grateful to all of you for being here. But if I want to ask one last question about a very special person to the Latino community, to all of us, and that's Our Lady of Guadalupe. John Paul II called her the patroness of the Americas, and so she's someone we can count on for her intercession. But I think Laura, you might be able to speak to that in a particular way. What does Our Lady of Guadalupe mean to you and maybe to Mexican people more generally?
Yeah, I think that being a Latino Catholic in America, immigrant, really means that there's so many things from your country where you were residing before that come into play when you come into a new country. And there's just things that you are never going to take away from the Latino immigrant, and that is their religion. It has been really important for my community to uphold those beliefs and what the Virgen of Guadalupe represents to us. I mean, when we get baptized, we get a nice big gold chain with the Virgen de Guadalupe. And the men receive the sign of the cross or something different. And then when we turn quinceañeras, big quinceañeras, you get another big chain with the Virgen of Guadalupe. And I think that speaks volumes about these things that are part of our culture that will forever be part of us, even if, as an immigrant myself who grew up here, came here when I was 8 years old, has been very important. One of the things that I find really interesting, and sometimes I don't even notice it anymore because it's been ingrained in my mind and in my heart for so long, is that I have friends and families or people that we help who always want to give you something. And they always tend to give you something that relates to church. I don't know why. It's like a blessing, right? It's a blessing. So I have a lot of images of La Virgen de Guadalupe. And when I walk out of my house, I have a mirror where I make sure that I'm at least wearing the same color clothes, because sometimes I'm rushing out. I forget if I'm matching or not. And one of the things that I do without even thinking about it anymore is that I do the sign of the cross and I say, Gracias, Virgencita, thank you. Te pido la bendición. I ask for your blessing. And so I walk out and I do the sign of the cross and then turn my head out the door, knowing that I have her following me, catching me if I fall, or if at any point I feel like I can't keep going with everything that's happening. And so that's been really important in our culture, to identify with someone who does not believe in borders, who is with us at any point that we need her. And she's our mother. She is the person that we talk to when we don't have family members around, like myself, whose family is no longer here. Everybody has left back to Mexico. And so it's been really important to uphold her and to celebrate her. And so when we have these big parties with La Virgen de Guadalupe on December 12, we have the best tamales, because she's part of our culture. So I invite everyone to attend one of these celebrations because they're amazing. It's colorful, it's beautiful. And so, yeah, having the Virgen of Guadalupe represents us and with us at all times. It's been part of how we survive in this country.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for that. And like you say, she's the mother of all of us, and it really signifies the one human family that we all are together, without borders. Beautifully said. I'd like to ask for questions from the audience, James, if you're ready. But before we do that, is there for the people that are online, we'll be taking your questions now too. So the first question that we have coming in through Twitter here is, where does the church stand on building a border wall? Do you? Because we actually didn't talk about the wall, which has been very much a subject of conversation lately. So maybe this is best for you, Kevin. Just because there's obviously the security concerns, and the church does uphold the sovereignty of nations, and on the other side there's people that are really suffering. So can you walk us through that? Where does the church stand on?
Well, I knew about this question because I've been looking at it for the last 20 minutes on the prompter. Yes. So I'm ready for it. The church stands on both sides of the wall. And what do I mean by that? The church is universal, okay? We're present in sending, transit, and destination countries, right? So as the Pope said in his response to then candidate Trump when he was in Mexico, we're in the business of building bridges, not walls. And the church's answer to a border wall is to address the root causes of migration, which in Washington is not very popular. It's not very interesting. It'll take a long time and a lot of commitment, but that's really the long-term solution to irregular migration. We're never going to stop irregular migration altogether. But if you go to the root causes, you address the poverty and the conflict in many of these sending countries, people will stay and will support their families in dignity. There's a right to migrate in the church, but there's also a right not to migrate, that people should have the option. That it's not a necessity, it's a choice, and that they should be able to stay. And if you ask many immigrants, they would choose to stay if they could support their families in dignity. So, I mean, there are a lot of reasons not to support the wall other than the broader reason I just outlined, the efficacy of it, the expense of it. The bishops on the border, in fact, Bishop Kakanis in America Magazine just argued that it drives migrants into more remote regions and would increase deaths. And that's the humanitarian aspect of the wall that's not been discussed. They're not going to be able to build a wall all over the 2,000 miles. There's environmental issues, there's property rights issues. But beside that, the overall long-term view of the church is we have to build bridges. We have to look at why people are moving, the persecution, the poverty, and we need to focus on that for a long period of time, and eventually that will be the humane solution long-term.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions here? Keep in mind you might be on live stream, not to discourage you, but yeah, James, we have a question up front here. But we're going to bring a microphone for you, just so they can hear you.
Might be able to be heard.
Well, it's just
We
want to make sure the folks at home can hear it too.
Yeah. So if you can project, that would be wonderful.
Oh, okay.
This
It'll be okay.
comment really is for Jill.
Yes.
Because a couple of weeks ago, David Brooks had a column about what schools are doing well and what schools are failing. And he said, so much of it depends on the principal. That the principals who are really involved with the children and the families do well. And it sounds to me like you pick principals who want to be involved with it on every level.
Yes, I mean, I completely agreed. I read that and thought the same thing and felt really happy with the principals we have running our schools. It's a mission. I mean, and it's not just the principal. It's a lot of the people in our buildings have been coming. You know, we have folks that have been coming for 45 years to that same neighborhood. And some of them go to church in that neighborhood even though they don't live there because they've really embedded themselves in that community. So, yeah, that was a great article, and I totally agree. Father Dufal.
Jill, isn't the big difference money? I mean, you have access to more money. You're the charter schools of the Catholic school system. You know, I think it's unfair because they're fabulous principals, but they don't have the access to the funds that you have. You know, and so that I just think that there's a lack of justice here, in the sense that, you know, there's schools closing, and maybe they shouldn't close. Maybe there should be more creative ways of doing things. But you know, you started off at Lady Mount Carmel, you know, that whole big crisis there, and it's a great thing that happened. And then you pulled away. You know, there's a certain separatism. You know, even in the church we have injustice and inequality. You know, it's unbelievable. And it's not just in education. I mean, in terms of immigration, a lot of people in the Catholic community are opposed to immigrants. And it's just unfortunate. I heard you I think at Notre Dame, you know, many years ago. You know, and the 1990 or whatever it was, the Clinton immigration proposal that brought us all together. There's such separatism now in the school system. I mean, when I was a young priest, almost 49 years ago now, you know, we worked together, Catholics, Protestants, Jews. We had, here in Manhattan, we had what we call the Levites, all the young clergy of Manhattan, and working on real issues. And none of that's happening because there's such a separation. And that has even happened in the school system.
Well, I would just respond to that by saying we are spending somewhat more than the Archdiocese spends for their schools. They're spending over $8,000 per student. We're spending about $9,200 per student. So yes, we are spending a little bit more money. But what we're also trying to do is prove a model and be almost a laboratory and a test case so that, for instance, the Archdiocese has taken the same math curriculum we're using and they've brought it to the whole system. So we're trying to also spend a little more, but be a proof point so that then it can help all boats rise, because you're going to learn something with 6 schools that you couldn't do for 200 schools.
Are there any other questions? Yeah. With the microphone, yeah, that'd be great.
Speak loud or use the microphone? Right into that. Okay. Hi, my name is I'm Wally Rodier. I live on Long Island, and I'm involved in prison ministry in Nassau County. And I was intrigued by your Thrive for Life prison ministry program. Where I am, in Nassau County Jail, there's a very large Hispanic Latino population. And I'm just wondering, what you were speaking about, I think has to do with a population that is more or less permanent. In other words, a population that has, let's say, people who have been convicted and are now doing time. So there would be a time frame involved where they might be doing a year or two. In a jail situation, what is supposed to be is no more than a year that you're waiting either arraignment or something to happen. That's not always the case. I see people who are there for maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 years because of lingering issues that in the court systems are just grind away. Do you see that a program like this, from formerly incarcerated to incarcerated individuals, could happen in a jail situation where you don't have that, like, for instance, upstate, you have programs that are initiated?
Thank you very much, and particularly thank you for your good work in Nassau County. It's a wonderful thing that you're doing and been involved with. So just for a little bit of clarification, we got our start in the New York City Department of Corrections, Rikers Island. So as you know, that's the city jail, and it's pre-conviction of anything, right? Except the people who are there serving their city time, their city sentences. And we're still very much involved. Twice a week we're involved in the New York City Department of Corrections. So on Rikers Island, and then also at the Manhattan Detention Center, which is located on Canal and Center here in Manhattan. The city has some jails that are outside of the island. There's a boat that actually sits in the river, and there's a Manhattan House in Manhattan, and there's the Brooklyn House. So we're involved in that context and that culture as well. And right, so that's a whole different approach. One of the things that's very vital and key with that population is the accompaniment piece, right? So one of the things as far as spirituality that we offer is the examine. Everything we do is rooted in the examine of inviting people to take a look at their life through the loving eyes of God, using the Signation tool. Now, they get shuffled all around the island. They're in different jails, so we don't always see them for as long of a time as we'd see them if they were upstate. But the advocacy piece is very important, right? We meet people at a very deep level. We're accompanying them very spiritually. And for the Latino population, unfortunately, there are situations that arise that there are people without papers, right? There are people that don't have any family around. They're nervous about what's going on and what's next. So really being there for them in that is very vital to what we're doing. As far as the formerly incarcerated piece with Rikers Island, we have partnered with Manhattan College. Manhattan College is offering college classes on Rikers Island to a group of sentenced inmates in the sentence jail on Rikers Island. And we've partnered with them, and they have told us that anyone who takes their class while they're on Rikers Island can receive scholarships right to Manhattan College while living at Ignacio House when they come out. So offering that continuity of care is very important so they can have that supportive piece and that hospitality so they can continue that next step in studies, but also those who are reentering that we might meet while they're serving city time, and we help them with fighting their case or going to trial with them. Offering them that hospitality and accompaniment is just as vital, even as upstate. But you're right, the state population is much more stable. They have their sentence, they serve a certain time, and then they're out. Rikers Island is complicated.
Thank you very much. That's a great question. I don't want to ignore our live stream audience here. So if I could just ask, there's a question here that maybe, Laura, you could address. What more can the church do to support immigrant brothers and sisters? Have they done enough? We sort of talked about this a little bit already before, but maybe you'd like to answer that question.
Yeah, I think Kevin had said before, more involvement, whether it's writing a letter, sponsoring someone to be able to do a variety of different things, maybe helping a DACA recipient who needs to renew. I think little things like that make a big difference and create that community that we're always looking for. I think sometimes we feel really lost when we don't have or see the same people that we would expect to be there at these events. And so the reality is that our community is even afraid to attend rallies nowadays because they're coming after activists. And so if more people who don't look like us but have that voting power can show up for us, it's really, really, really important because the people who have the vote have the power. And those are the people who are going to be noticed more if they attend these events. And so I think there's always room to do more for any issue. And I think that as a community, as a Catholic community, we need to speak out a little bit more in that way.
Great. Thank you very much. That's a great answer. We have a question from the audience here.
I can just go. Jill, you referred to your space sort of a test kitchen where you can try new things. Exciting. What advice would you have for teachers at underfunded public schools who aren't able to try these new things you've tried? Any ideas?
Well, I mean, I think we could probably learn from each other more than we are now because I think they're very siloed sectors, right? The Catholic schools, charter schools, public schools, and there probably could be, maybe even be partnerships or ways to communicate. I mean, we're always happy to give away what we've learned and try to share it with other people, curriculum-wise or teaching-wise. We partner right now with Teach Like a Champion, which is out of Uncommon Schools, and it's a professional development organization that helps us train and give our teachers the tools they need to do better. So we're always willing to share what we're doing well. Our main focus is on curriculum and instruction. Our schools have already been, they are really good from a foundational standpoint, the culture, and everyone was ready to learn something new and try something to get better. And so I think we've really focused on those two things, and we're always happy to share what we've learned.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. I understand that we're so grateful that you've all taken the time out of your evening to join us, to join this conversation. The conversation continues after this panel, and it started before this panel, of course. So we're just continuing the conversation and exploring it more deeply here. You can constantly interact with America Media via our social media channels and even the good old-fashioned telephone if you want to give us a call. And letter writing as well. We also receive mail here, by the way. But just for the people who joined us via live stream, thank you very much for being here and for being a part of this conversation. And thank you all very much. And thank you. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.